The Reprehensibles, Chapter 5. Maria was unusually quiet the next morning as she sat next to Wilson as they headed for the reserve in the transitway. Maria stared at kilometers of modules as Wilson continued to talk about himself. And 600 people directly under you is no small challenge, Maria. I know that Neville thinks that I'm up to it, and more. He told me as much. And I've shown my ability in the past, and I'm not stretching the truth when I say I've become his right-hand man, he said, as he noticed she was not paying attention to him. Hey, Maria, you're not listening to me. He laughed, putting his arm around her. Oh, I'm listening, she said, still upset with him about last night. Look, the sky's almost clear, said Wilson as he pointed outside. Well, it'd be nice if it stayed that way, Terrance. Just how many times have you been up here? Well, sometimes. It's a good change from the lunar surface. Speaking of the lunar surface, don't you think this murder investigation will affect your standing with the Lunar Aggregate Company? See, I was listening, she laughed. But Wilson was not amused, and hatred filled his brown eyes. I told you I don't want to talk about the murder or anything else. But it's not the murder. Don't mention it again. All right, I'm sorry. Just trying to... You should be sorry. If one of your close friends was killed, would you want me bugging you about it? Maria could see she was not having a good time. I said I was sorry, she repeated as the transitway decreased its speed. Come on, let's get up front. I don't like this waiting. As he went to grasp her hand, she pulled back. As if he owned the train, Wilson put Maria past the people waiting in line, but no one stopped him when he shoved his computer card into the slot. You really shouldn't be out in front of these people there, Terrance. Give me your card, he ordered. You only got 8 hours. Maria rolled her eyes as Wilson jammed her card in the slot. He looked as if he was still upset about her mentioning the murder. The very thought of the badgering Inspector Glass seemed to throw him over the edge.
You may both pass. People are waiting,
said the computer. The terminal to the reserve ordered the reserve itself. However, there was no conventional opening to the inside. All entry was made via several movers in the ground. Wilson walked rapidly ahead of her, letting Maria trail behind to catch a glimpse of the treetops over the wall. She marveled at the thickly foliated branches in the distance. She had only seen trees a couple of times in her life, and now she could see the beginnings of a mountain range and clouds. Thin white clouds floating in a clear blue atmosphere. She stopped in the center of the terminal as the transitway pulled away from the area, and she was genuinely mystified by all these new things she had never had experienced on such a scale. Will you hurry up? Shouted Wilson as he stood up with 2 militiamen next to a computer slot. She walked over to him slowly as he remained upset. Gee, I try to get ahead and you just take your time. Maria gazed at him and then looked inside the reserve. You both are cleared by the computer, said one of the military men. Good, said Wilson as he took the passes. How far is Rose Garden from here? Maria asked as she came up to him. Oh, about 10 kilometers, he answered as he stepped onto the mover. Have a nice hike, said the militiaman, but Wilson did not answer. Thank you, said Maria as she too stepped on the clear shield and they sunk into the ground. They were both silent as they passed through the blue light of the mover. For some time they moved horizontally, and it was just a few minutes before the first vestige of light appeared above them. The mover rose up slowly, and they found themselves isolated in a forested glen. Maria ran from the shield and onto the bright green grass, the reserve sun warming her pale, dry face. The grass was longer on the banks of a small pond with weeping willows that she had only read about, spreading their limbs overhead. White ducks moved along the shimmering water in formation, while birds chirped in the trees. She closed her eyes and exposed her face to the sun without fear of getting injured by the ultraviolet rays. As she opened her eyes, she looked ahead to a narrow dirt road leading to a pond, by a cornfield and a hill, up over knolls toward a chain of smooth-backed, glaciated mountains. She was absolutely dumbfounded, unable to comprehend what she was seeing, and she began to shed tears as Wilson caught up with her. You're crying, Maria. I'm sorry. That murder business upsets me, or was it last night? No, Terrance. She smiled and wiped the tears from her eyes. That's not it. Then what is it? What is it? What did I do? She paused for a few moments. opening her mouth several times as she attempted to speak. "It's just that I never," she turned toward the mountains, "I've never seen so much simple beauty. Beauty, pure and simple. Life, abounding life," she yelled as she ran ahead of him and smiled gleefully. "It's like a wonderland." "I don't understand," he called to her. "That's because you're not an outsider, Terrance." They walked up the dirt road and up and down through the cornfields as they closed in on the mountains. Maria would run ahead of Wilson, stopping periodically to run her fingers along the ears of corn, or to scoop up the rich brown soil and let it fall back to the ground through her fingers. Wilson would catch up to her, and then she'd run ahead again. Over the last hill at the base of the first mountain, the forest began, and a well-trampled trail pierced the thick woodland slope. Maria seemed intoxicated with the sturdy oaks and the gentle pine needles that covered the forest floor. She climbed over the boulders, which were moved and crushed by glaciers of eons past. She ran her fingers along the granite, intuitively trying to grasp the whole puzzle, and in her thoughts as they moved up the hill, the old man's babbling flashed in and out of her mind like the squirrels darting through the woods, or a deer appearing for an instant in the distance. And it was all so incomprehensible, so void of descriptive words that she couldn't even express. Wilson, not quite devoured by the rapture, had eased his irritability and seemed more tranquil as they hiked to the top of the range. On the lunar surface, the subject of Terrance Wilson did not ease the mind of Inspector Manford Glass. Across the millions of kilometers of black space, he and his two associates were finishing their lunch in a sidewalk cafe in the sector station. Although he had been on the moon for only a short time, he was frustrated. Earth City was pressuring him for a quick resolution of the murder. But his digging for information had produced little in the way of solid information. It was only Neville's influence that allowed Wilson to return to Earth and his family for 2 weeks. Glass was a man who did not mind digging for information as long as it produced results. "Yes, if you would kindly bring me more nudge cake. The cherries on top," he said politely. So Manford, said Stephanie, "what's taking so damn long?" "I don't know," said Glass as he finished up the last few bites of the first nudge cake. "I don't know either," said Harrier. "They never take this long to expedite a subject. What's so special about Wilson?" Neville Constantine. "Ladies, this is a unique case. It's totally He stopped as the waitress brought him an enormous piece and slice of nudge cake, chocolate and filled with more soup into his cup. "Thank you, my dear," smiled the inspector as he looked back to his assistants. "As I was saying, this is totally unprecedented. They want me to proceed with caution with the Lunar aggregate personnel because they don't know how it'll affect the future. You know, their company and such. You can't just yank everyone around the solar system because they're suspects. But you know that Wilson is generally a liar," stated Stephanie. "Oh, he's a fast talker, all right. Oh, look how long he's been betting up to Daughter." "And many others," said Stephanie. "Right," said Glass, his face stuffed with the nudge cake. "Now, I don't object to a little fun in the sun, believe me. Good luck to him. What I object to," he said as he washed down the nudge cake with more soup on, "is that he's so reckless. He doesn't care who he hurts. Look at the way he hid the relationship from the old man all that time." "He must take us for fools," insinuated Ria. "Ah, he's too sure of himself. But give him enough rope," smiled Glass as he sipped the soup on it. "Getting back to basics, which is what I wanted to do when we interviewed Neville and Andrea upstairs. The old issue of who benefits in front of us. Who does benefit from the death of Darius Constantine?" "They all benefit," said Stephanie. "All right, then. Who would go to those lengths to kill the old man? Not as much who would gain, but who would carry it out with any motive. Neville is just too cunning to walk up there himself and wipe out the old man, which is why I say we must find this Duval," he said, finishing the second sliver of nudge cake. "Well, it's almost 8 o'clock, ladies. I suggest we get upstairs." Neville was seated behind his terminal desk, leaning back in the chair, relaxed and unafraid of the impending interview with Inspector Glass. His sister was not as confident as she sat on the side sofa in a nervous frenzy. "I see no reason for you to act in such a manner, Andrea," he said. "I was just wondering what he'll ask. And why hasn't Terrance come back? He knows I'm depressed." "I'm sure Wilson has much to attend to on Earth," said Neville, who knew the workings of Wilson's mind. "And you would do yourself good not to worry about the inspector. You have nothing to hide," he said as he waited. "Have you? How dare you, Neville?" she yelled as she stood up. "Touchy, touchy, touchy," he smiled as her eyes sizzled. "Is that all you have to do? Provoke me? A bit of sarcasm I thought you'd enjoy. I apologize," he said as the computer beeped. "Yes, what is it?"
Inspector Glass and his assistants are outside.
"Send them in at once," he said, arising from the desk. Glass walked in ahead of the other woman, carrying his computer. As Neville extended his hand, "Ah, Inspector Glass, what a pleasure to see you and your adorable assistants once again." "I wish the feeling was mutual, Constantine," said Glass, resuming his abrasive investigative style. He walked right by Neville's outstretched hand and took over the computer terminal, activating his own computer. "That's my desk, and this is my investigation. Sit down over there with your sister, Constantine," he said, pointing at the sofa. The ladies pulled up 2 chairs from across the room and stationed themselves in the middle. "Do you have a name for your computer?" "No, it's just computer." "Really? I call mine Genevieve," said Glass fictitiously. "You have no compassion, Constantine." "I don't have to take this," said Neville as he stood up. "I'm afraid you do. Now sit down. Genevieve, darling. Computer, activate the sound screens. Let's get going here." Infuriated, the new head of Lunar Aggregate sank down into the sofa and folded his arms across his chest. "How many times are you going to interview us, Inspector?" He fiddled with the machine. He looked up at Neville. "Why do I keep after you, Neville? Is that it? I'll tell you why. Because you can't stand to have people on your back. I don't know whether you're guilty or not, but I love standing in your way." "I'm calling Earth right now," said Neville, rising once again. "This is ridiculous. And I shall tell them how you were not seen by anyone from 7:51 a.m. until just before 8 o'clock, and how you admitted being in the murder area within 5 minutes of your father's death. Do you think they will listen to your ridiculous objections about being interviewed? And what I would like to know, Mr. Constantine, is why the entire area was swept of DNA, fingerprints, any trace of the murderer." Neville glared at him, knowing full well the inspector had the upper hand. "Very well, you win this one, Inspector. Begin your questions," he said as he sat next to his sister. "And now, Andrea," began Glass. "Yes," she said, putting on a nervous smile. "How are you, dear?" "Well, I'm fine, Inspector." "Good, good. I'd like to know how the death of your father has benefited your relationship with Mr. Wilson." Andrea began to move around on the sofa, clasping her hands together and rubbing them as if she were cleaning. She shook her head erratically as she tried to speak. I don't know what you mean." "Oh, surely you do," said Glass as he stood. "Darius Constantine had no use for Terrance Wilson. We all know that." "Well, if you mean father didn't like Terrance, well, I guess the answer would be he did not," she rambled. "But he could have later." "Later? After we were married." "Wilson promised to marry you?" Glass asked unbelievingly. "Andrea," said Neville, crushing his molars together as he spoke. "Yes, after he returned from Earth," she answered. "He said—" "Come on, Miss Constantine. If you have something to say, then say it." "He said things would be, different. Did he now?" smiled Glass as he turned to Neville. "And what do you know about this?" I know nothing of this so-called proposal. Are you saying they conspired to kill my father? You better have good proof. Please, folks, let's not lose our tempers, said the inspector as he deliberately had provoked them. I don't want to rattle anybody's cage. Oh, sure, cracked Neville as Andrea began to weep. See what you've done now, Glass? Either ask your questions in a civil manner or we'll say nothing more. Andrea, did you kill your father? Glass asked her bluntly. Well, that's enough, said Neville. Andrea kept crying as if her tears would somehow keep Glass at bay. But the tears appeared to be draining her physically. Oh, father! Oh, father! She mumbled as she cried. Computer, lower the screens! Ordered Neville, but it was Inspector Glass's portable computer that had the screens up.
Unable to do so,
said Desmond's computer. What? He said as he thought the computer was defying him. You will do it! Hold it. Hold it, Neville. Computer, lower screens, ordered Glass. You see, they only respond to me or one of my assistants. Ah, screamed Neville. Computer, bring in Stewart. The doors opened as responsive aide rushed into the room. Yes, Neville. Escort Andrea to her room, Stewart, he said as Stewart helped the confused woman from the sulfur. Neville followed them from the room, his face tightening like a mad dog, ready to tear apart an intruder into his territory. When they reached the corridor, he began to shout, That man is pushing me too far, and he'll live to regret it. Where are you going? Asked Stewart as Neville began to walk in the opposite direction. I have business to attend to, he said as he left them. You were hard on the girl, Manford, said Stephanie. Never mind that. Did you hear Neville? Follow him. See where he goes, said Glass. I'm calling Earth to get the good Mr. Wilson back up here. Stephanie ran into the corridor and caught sight of Neville turning right into another corridor some distance away. She and Arya sprinted to catch up with him as they stopped near the other corridor. It was now empty and they feared they had lost him. On the left was a shorter corridor which they entered, and they could see it was a definite dead end. Check the closet at the end, said Arya as she ran down the outside corridor. Stephanie rushed to the closet doors and opened them. Inside was a narrow, constricted room with cleaning equipment and bottle-filled dusty shelves. She spun around and hurried back to the other corridor as Arya was coming back. Ends at the closet, Arya, she told her. And he could have gone a number of ways down there. We lost him. The inspector is going to love this one. Let's just hope he can get Wilson back up here, said Stephanie. Wilson had no idea that the efforts were underway to haul him back to the moon. He and Maria had climbed up to a rocky area, and the temperature had dropped slightly. The valley was hidden below the rocks, and they would have to reach a higher level before they could see how the human habitation had spread. Why are all the trees gone? Asked Maria. The fall line. Didn't your computer tell you anything? Laughed Wilson as he thought she was joking. Katie never talks about trees. Why should he? Asked Maria as she looked closely at the rocks. And these lines. Come on, Maria, people are behind us. Let's get to the top. They rose higher, climbing by several groups of people negotiating the rocks on their way to the summit. The valley was coming into view, as was the edge of the Zambian dome, several hundred meters below them. It was only the base that gave it away. The modules were well defined, like thousands of colossal building block mountains in the distance. But these mountains, like most of the mountains in the world, had not been preserved. The modules walked upward over the mountains outside, like the evening tide over the beach. The habitats, said Maria as she saw the towering structures slicing through the topography, joining the two identical north-south habitats. Over there, Terrance, she said as they neared the top. The greenie camps. All of Earth seems to be covered. The population is out of control. Well, that goes without saying. I had forgotten everything was so large, said Wilson as he looked down. Camps were foreboding, even at this distance. As far as the eye could see, the solid white barrier fenced them inside. Smoke arose from the various fires spread apart in this rectangular prison. The Seventh River, a wide and sludgy body of water, flowed beneath the modules and under the barrier and into the camps. It meandered across the camps, submerging again at the far side of the barrier. They drink that water undistilled, don't they? Do they? How vulgar, he said as he sat down on the rock. Well, I guess you never thought you'd see anything like this, eh, Maria? It makes me wonder. Wonder about what? He said as he stretched his powerful muscles. And what was it like before all this? I mean, what did it look like, say, 1,000 years ago or longer? She asked, thinking about the old man, tantalized by the thought. You're thinking about Antone again. Forget him. But the river, it must have flowed out in the open at one time. Who knows? I have trouble enough worrying about today, let alone what happened 1,000 years ago. Picture that river, Terrance, without all these modules and the billions of people covering it. No sludge, nothing. What are you gonna do, Maria? Distill the whole river? No, she said as she stood up on the rocks overlooking the valley. Before that sludge and the land of the valley, like land at the base of the reserve, with corn and trees. Can you see it? Yeah, so what? So it must have been that way at one time, she maintained. Level the quadrant, plant the corn. What I'm saying, she said as she snarled at him, how did it get like it is today? Well, the population grew and they built it. Very easy to understand. What's the mystery? That's what the computers tell us. That's all our technology, our culture. Everything sprang up from this increased population. But it could have been different. Now you say the computers are lying. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But just look out there. It's all so massive. And you're down there and you don't even think about anything else but S11 and A98. But from here, look at it. It all goes to the horizon. Everywhere the continent is covered. Quite a sight, isn't it? I thought you'd like it, said Wilson as the tiny radio on his shoulder buzzed.
Call from your mother,
said the computer. Put her on.
Terrance.
I'm on top of the summit. What's the problem?
Inspector Glass.
Glass? Shouted Wilson as he stood up. Tell him to lay off. I won't.
He's on the screen. There are M&Ms on the way to the habitat. He's ordered you back to the moon.
Who the hell does he think he is? Yelled Wilson as the other people on the mountain summit looked over at him.
You have 4 hours to return here, or they'll send their military men out for you.
Oh, I don't believe this, said Wilson, stomping on the rocks. Advise him I'll be at the habitat on time, or at least let me enjoy my last few hours of sanity. This won't hurt your position with Lunar aggregate, will it? Asked Maria as the communication ended. No, I'm not worried about that at this moment. Then what does this all mean, Terrance? It means I have a lot of explaining to do to Inspector Manford Glass. The Reprehensibles, Chapter 5, Part 2. Several hours later, Maria boarded the transitway and left for an abbreviated return to the habitat life from the clear atmosphere of the reserve. Wilson had treated her rather shabbily the whole time, but the time they spent together was not what was bothering her. She feared he might be in more trouble than he was letting on. Moving to a seat and back, she could sense an aching in her muscles from the mountain climb. She yawned and looked out at the windows at the sky. They had been fortunate, as the low overhanging clouds were now racing across the evening sky once again. She lay back in the seat. The transitway rumbled back to S11.
Delay,
said the computer as its volume increased. Maria opened her eyes, still half dazed.
There will be a slight delay at S11.
It cautioned the passengers as the transitway stopped several meters from the terminal. Maria was just beginning to wake up as the computer continued.
A food riot is taking place in S11 vicinity. Delay will be momentary.
She and everyone else aboard the train turned abruptly to the right. The car behind her buzzed with talk as they heard distant sounds of a man shouting and people screaming. It must have been some sort of sham, she thought. Food riots in her section? That would mean a critical food shortage. No one had ever envisioned such a calamity. Food always had been piped into the modules. It was something they expected without question. Another transit backed into the station, and militiamen were transporting the unconscious bodies of rioters onto a makeshift conveyor to the transitway. And the penalty for rioting was an airlift to the Greenies' camp. The sight of her family fleeing violence took hold of her volatile mind. To the rear of the terminal, fires blazed into the early evening sky. Bulging fire blimps dumped tons of sludge-laden water on the spreading inferno, but dumping water risked explosions as water was inundated with a number of uncertain chemical mixtures. Very often the modules went up in a huge fireball. Minutes went by until the flames subsided. The first transitway had left the station, and Maria's transit rolled into the terminal. Disembarkment was orderly, and all the passengers, even those not scheduled to get off on S11, were told to form a line. In this way, the militiamen could bring the remaining riot victims to the empty cars. Maria stood along the outside wall in disbelief as they loaded the transit and it left the terminal. In the cold, her mind was firmly off Wilson, and she thought about her own family as her heart beat against her chest. The Earth's state of order seemed to be slipping away right before her eyes. The smell of melted zambium drifted through the area. Despite the cold, she was sweating as the line moved ever so slowly toward the opening. And along the terminal wall, there were several of the Lunar aggregate marquees in blue neon-like light that beckoned for workers on the lunar surface. The advertisement enthralled her spirits like Mecca in the night sky. She looked up toward the moon, but the sky was too hazy, and once more it brought Mr. Terrance Wilson to mind. And in the huge Lunar aggregate logo, she could sense a land far away, not crowded with people, a land of opportunity and adventure. Computer, how do I apply for one of these positions on the lunar surface?
Please insert your card.
Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out her identity card, pushing it into the computer slot.
Very good. If you wish to be considered, Miss Almonte, you will push the red sensor to the right of this board. All information will be taken from your identity card and immediately scanned by the computers into the city. If the information is in line with the Lunar aggregate qualifications, it will. Final candidates will be inputted into the Lunar aggregate computers and an input list given to Lunar aggregate. If you are eligible, you will be notified in a period of not less than 2 hours and not more than 10 hours.
Maria waited as she looked at the red sensor and realized the implications of what she was about to do. She raised her hand quickly and pushed the sensor. "These jobs relate to the farms?" she asked the computer as she studied the marquees once again.
The majority are farm positions, and all candidates will be fitted into the appropriate jobs, each suiting Lunar aggregate needs and abilities of the candidates.
Maria nodded as the card popped from the slot. "Thank you for applying, Miss Almonte."
Your scan has already begun. You will be notified at your residence.
"Very good," said Maria as she put her card back in her pocket. The militiamen started to shout out instructions ahead. Apparently some people, even though the riot was over, had been injured, and there were still reports of sporadic blaster fire. Maria stood on her toes, but she could not see inside.
You are to proceed in an orderly manner to your place of residence. If it has been destroyed, you will go at once to the militia armory across from the Greenie barrier. All persons are to proceed at their own risk. There are still rioters about, and our men have orders to blast any overt moves against them. Travelers will proceed at their own risk.
As the man finished, the line of people moved forward and another transitway pulled into the terminal. Each person going to S11 inserted his identity card into the slot and was allowed to pass. Maria walked through the opening, but she was horrified at the destruction. The water from the dumps had already begun to freeze over the luminous white Zambian road, and what had not been frozen was splattered in cold pools mixed with debris and blood. Clutching onto her blaster, she remained in a state of shock. Entire modules further down had been melted like candle wax and smelt like burnt charcoal. The remaining globs of zambium continued to glow in the familiar green hue. The disaster made her fear the worst as she ran across the ice. As she came to A98, there were still several bodies, greenies, scattered about the road. Ahead, in the diminished blue light of A98, a singular figure limped down the frozen street. She was hesitant to continue down the street until she could see that figure was a militiaman. She then ran forward toward the man. He turned suddenly, and she raised both her hands to her mouth. "Michael!" she screamed. The wounded Stracco had a deep gash over his right eye, and blood flowed in streaked pathways into his eye and down the side of his face. "Maria," he said in an almost incoherent voice, "I was hit." "Oh, Michael, you're hurt?" No, it's not that bad, just bloody. One of those crazies jumped me back there, and 2 of his friends joined in." She took her new turtleneck and wiped some of the peripheral blood from his face as he continued. "Before I could get my blaster, they stabbed me, and I was on my way to see if you and your family were all right." "It's all right, Michael," she said as she cleared the blood away from the gash. "We all have to go to the module. I got them, though," he added as she led him forward. Both sides of A98 reflected the damage. Several modules had been completely wiped out, while others stood in the eerie glow. She grew apprehensive as she peered to her left, as the Almonte module was intact, even though the adjacent ones had been demolished. She rushed for her computer slot and inserted her card. "Katie, are they all right?"
They have been escorted to the armory and use the screen to talk to them as soon as possible."
"Then can we come inside?" asked Maria.
You can. Your module is undamaged. I've scanned the computers in the area. 400 modules in the T have been rendered unfit for living.
Why? Why? She wanted to know.
There's been no official word, Maria,
said the computer as they stepped onto the mover and descended below the streets. "I can give you some official news," said Stracco. "A massive escape of greenies this afternoon. No one knows why, but more than that, our own people were involved. I saw them. No food, absolutely no food. Eddie Rannoch, the Sherrick's family, all begging for food. A number of conduit lines have been completely shut off." "Well, that's crazy. Why not just shut everyone down a little bit?" "A computer suggestion, and the computers in Earth City agreed," he said as they came up to the module. "Look, underlying this is the fact that the greenies started this whole thing, not our people." "Katie, scan the armory," said Maria as they walked inside.
Scanning.
"Katie, what time is it?" asked Stracco.
7:35, Captain Stracco.
"Thank you." It took a few minutes for the computer to alert the Almontes at the armory, and Maria got excited as she saw her mother on the screen in front of the hundreds that had gathered inside. "Are you all right?" Maria asked them.
We're both fine, Maria, but Andrew is missing,
said Almonte. Missing, she shouted as Stracco came over to comfort her.
He was with the Eternalists when the riot started. Is that Mike with you?
Yes, Frank, I'm right here.
Those people tried to talk to the Greenies, from what I heard. The militiamen started loading them into the transitway. The computers have contacted the military men. They're searching for Andrew right now. We're spending the night. It's only a precaution. The riot is over now, they tell me, but I've heard rumors of troubles all over the quadrant.
You'll contact us if you hear anything else about Andrew. I'll see you tomorrow, Mother.
Good night.
Katie, get me Terrance Wilson on the screen. At the habitat, Wilson was packing his clothes as Andy Wilson watched. Their computer beeped, disturbing Wilson. What do you want?
Call from Miss Almonte.
Forget it. Tell her I've left. I don't want to talk to her, he said as he shut the suitcase. You can't do that, Terrance. It's not civil. I don't have to listen to this. I don't want to, he said as he jumped from the room. Maria looked down at the floor as she walked into the other room. Stracco had caught sight of Wilson's suitcase on the screen, but he tried to restrain his remarks as he walked in. Not home, eh? As she looked at his cot. It's bleeding again, Michael. Come into the cleaning room. We'll fix it. She led him into the small room. They sealed the gash with a closing device and used an additive to facilitate healing. Stracco cleaned his face. As he came back into the living room, she handed him a cup of hot Suprin, but his mind was on his mission and he pushed it away. Since when do you not like Suprin? Asked Maria. Been through a little too much today. I know, she said, sitting down on the chair. She ran her fingers through her dark hair. Can't believe this is happening. Can't last, reassured Stracco. People can't take it. The military men will get to the bottom of it, don't you worry. You have a lot of trust in your military men. Trust? He said seriously. I find it's always not good to trust until you have all the facts. Cynical tonight, aren't you? Me? Never. I believe in the future, he said as he walked around to her. You should just remember to see things as they are, Maria. I always try to, he said in an obvious reference to Wilson. Did you hear about the inspector dragging Terrance back to the lunar surface? Yeah, I heard. Lunar aggregate business, said Maria. He's really moving ahead when they're taking notice of his work. Katie, what time is it?
Time is 8:01, Captain.
What is it with you, Michael? Asking the time every few minutes. I have to leave here, Maria. What if those riots start again? I'm sorry, he said, unable to tell her where he was going. The mover opened and Stracco backed into the shield. Maria, I think a lot of you. As the door closed in front of him, he saw her disappear, wondering if he would ever see her again after this night's assignment. She stared at the slit where the open mover had been minutes before. He had just told her that he cared about her. He had never told her that in the past. Even when they had been so close, he never shared that. He never expressed those words to her. Maybe it was the emotions of the night, the neighborhood being destroyed, or the people being shuffled back to the armory. But he had said it, with passion and conviction. She turned and trudged slowly to the chair. The computer sounded. Yes, Katie?
Central Computer advises you have been accepted as a production analyst in a selected disk on the lunar surface.
Lunar surface?
The Central Computer wants to know if you'll accept the assignment.
Well, I don't know, she said. The reality now shook her illusions.
You have 2 hours, Maria, and the increase in benefits is 50%.
Maybe that will give me time, she said, stopping as she impulsively came to a decision. No. Tell them, I accept the job.
Insert your card, Maria, or I'll scan it to the central computer and record the change on your card.
She inserted the card and waited.
Scan. Maria, you have 2 days to report to the launching area of T1, called the OLA. From there, you will be brought to the Lunar Aggregate Orbiting Silo by a shuttle. The cargo ship will bring you the rest of the way to the moon. Keep in mind, they will brief you in your interview at OLA.
I guess I've done it then. And Andrew, any word on Andrew?
I will scan again. No word. He's still missing.
She thought about what she had done and then returned to the chair. On a commitment to work on the lunar surface. The farthest distance she had ever gone from her module was the trip she had just taken with Wilson on that very day, and the thought of traveling to the moon was almost beyond her realm of experience. Her immediate thoughts were with her eternalist cousin, and she was restless. If he had been taken by the greenies or thrown into the camps, she might never see Andrew again. Katie, I'm leaving to find Andrew. Let me in the mover. Outside it was dark and the street glowed bright white. A38 had been swept clean and the ice removed. Maria hurried from the mover and toward S11, still not quite sure what her course of action would be. S11 was not as clean as A98, still scattered with rubbish, and many of the militiamen were involved in sweeping down the street. Giant cylinders scooped up the rubble from the modules and brought it to a factory to be recycled. Stop! Called a young private as she headed in the direction of the military armory. Where do you think you're going? My cousin, he's lost. I'm going to look for him, said Maria. As he drew his blaster, she feared she'd be sent back to the module. You could be a rioter for all I know. Give me your card, he demanded, holding his blaster next to her Ralsted as she handed the card to him. He crammed it in the computer slot. Computer, clearance of this individual.
Cleared, Maria B. Almonte, A98.
And she says she's looking for her cousin. Do you know anything about this?
Your cousin is Andrew M. Almonte. Been missing for 8 hours.
Oh, said the private as he pulled back the card from the slot and gave it back to her. I would advise you, Maria Almonte, to go back to your module. There may be stragglers left out here. That's why I stopped you. I have my blaster, she said as she removed it from her pocket. Please put that away. Now, if you're going to stay outside, you'll need a clearance strip. The private headed over to his cart and took out a red and white armband from the cart. He put it around her arm and then warned her, keep it on or you'll be stopped again. I will. She smiled and began her trek with greater ease. Thank you. She called back and she trotted down toward S11, toward the Greenie barrier. The fighting had been less costly in this area. Modules on both sides of S11 were unscathed, and the side streets were untouched. In the distance, at the end of S11, she could see the glaring white light from the Greenie barrier. It rose high into the modules like a monolith dam, holding back tons of water. She increased her pace, looking down the empty side streets in their changing colors, but all she accomplished was to grow short of breath. She was rapidly coming to the end of S11 anyway, so she slowed to a walk. A large, circular area marked the end of S11, bordering the Greenie barrier. She stepped up to this so-called square and looked into the armory to her left, which was guarded by several groups of militiamen, but she could not prevent herself from gazing upward, 25 meters into the air to the top of the barrier. The pure white Zambian surface, interlaced with force field, was striking against the dark sky, and she traced it down along the ends of the streets, wondering how anyone could possibly escape the barrier. However, the barrier was penetrable. The militiamen had devices to split the barrier in emergencies, and there were men stationed every 10 meters along the barrier. She could see no sign of Andrew as she looked down at the men. Maybe they'd be able to be of assistance, she thought, as she crossed the square toward the militiamen. Almost instantaneously, a portion of the barrier seemed to erupt like water cascading from inside. This flowing white field, 5 meters wide and in some parts rolled up to the edge of the barrier, toppled over militiamen in its path. Maria spun around, but it was too late, and the mass knocked her to the ground. Her head spun as she looked up from the Zambian into a mass of white swirling light with 5 greenies hovering over her. She was dazed, too weak to get up and escape. The greenies checked ahead and saw the militiamen pouring from the armory. They picked up Maria by the arms and legs, and one of them pushed a sensor on the pyramid-shaped device, and energy blasted upward. The militiamen opened fire with their own blasters, but the wall had been designed to withstand such attacks. The greenies, with Maria in their clutches, safely returned inside, and the barrier resumed its usual smooth features. The greenies were incensed about the point they had chosen to exit, right in front of the armory, T-25. One of them led the way with a pyramid splitter in his hands. "The wrong location you choose," said the one holding her right arm. "Punished you'll be," shouted one of them next to her. "On patrol, the gods were. Later, we will settle it," he threatened as he reached inside of the barrier with the field rolling outward. They ran into the darkness as the splitting device was deactivated and the mass of Zambian fibers rebounded into their current shape. They stood atop of a long rolling incline. Thousands of thermal tents were ahead. The fires burned bright through the holes in the top of the tents as they carried Maria forward to the camps, away from the outside world. Outside, Colonel Gibbs had joined the men and took command of the situation in the square. Medical help was being administered to the injured men, and the other men were roused to the point of making an assault through the barrier. "But Colonel," pleaded one of his sergeants, "but they took one of our people. If we hurry—" "No, Sergeant. No, Sergeant. Risk 50 men through the barrier? And they already have the girl? Probably inside one of their tents. We could send 1,000,000 people in there," shouted Gibbs, "and would be no closer to finding her. That woman has had it."